Are you a huge game fan? No matter what it is, whether it's sports, card games, video games, board games, whether you are playing baseball or Tetris or we're playing some type of online World of Warcraft, games are about this journey that we go on, this concept that we take something that we have and that we can somehow conquer, that we're running around having fun, that we're interacting with other people. Search for God is much the same way. Welcome back to my channel. I'm Kolan Wright. This video is entitled How to Search for God. We know that when we play a game, we have certain game resources. We start with something that we have, what we bring to the table, knowledge. We're given certain positions, cards. We start with game rules, so we know that each game has rules that we have to follow by. Our search for God is somewhat the same way. We have certain things that we bring to the table. Most of us don't start a search for God when we're 1 or 2 years old. We know that we generally start in our teens, 20s, and 30s, which means we bring certain experiences, certain knowledge, things that we've interacted with when we begin our search. There's also certain rules that we go by when we're searching for God. We have certain things that we know and can do, but there's certain things we can't do. I can't swim underwater for more than, a minute or two unaided. We have limitations placed on us. So none of us come to this search for God in a blank state. We don't have prior knowledge, no prior information. Our knowledge, our emotions, they're colored by the world around us, by our experiences. Just like on a video game or a board game. When I was 3 years old, I would lose games of tic-tac-toe. I didn't know how to play, right? You would think no one can lose tic-tac-toe. Well, when you're 3 years old, you can lose tic-tac-toe. You don't understand the rules or really the strategy. There's not much strategy, but there is some. And so once you learn that strategy, pretty much that game can't be lost. So the game that we're playing in our search for God is basically our own lives. We're in a life and death struggle trying to figure out what is the truth. So when we started this search, we started a search for God, and we realized the search for truth and the search for God are basically searching for the same thing. We want to know what is ultimate reality, and we want answers to certain questions. And my question was what happens after death? Your question might be why is there evil? What is true about the universe? And so we're in this game of life that we're going to be searching for God, and we're going to find out what are our tools. What do we have and what do we bring to the table in this game? In every game, you have a starting location, right? If you are playing Axis and Allies, you might start as Germany, and you have a certain location that you're starting. Well, for humans, we know that we have a certain starting location as well. We have certain things that we have. The things that we know that we have our senses. We have our sight, hearing, touch, smell, taste. So we have these things that we use to gather information. Then we have the processing of the information, our knowledge, our experience, our emotions, our gut feeling. What do we think is going to happen? We look at the other players around us. What have they done in the past? How do I feel about them? What's my relationship with them? I know that if I play with my wife, I'm not going to be ruthless. I'm not going to be super cunning. I'm not going to be really serious. Be a bit lighthearted. If I win, I win. If I lose, I lose. But if I'm playing with my friends, it's on like Donkey Kong, right? My goal is to win, and their feelings, you can check those at the door. So we gather this information, and then we process the information through some internal things that we've learned. We have certain tendencies that we also have. So one of the first things is we should take an assessment of who we are. What do we know about ourselves? So in college, I was a psychology major, and one of the tests I remember learning about was a Myers-Briggs test. And so one of the things I learned about myself is I'm a introverted, intuitive, thinking, prospecting personality type. Well, what does that mean? What does that mean for who I am, and how can I learn a little bit more about myself? What I learned about myself is that these type of people are prone to change directions often. They rarely become set on one concept that they stop considering all other possibilities. In its purest form, this can lead to serial, impulsive obsessions that burn hot one day, only to cool when something else of interest appears on their radar. And if you know me, if my wife will tell you, that is me to a T. I have huge passions. I get on something and I just pursue it and pursue it and pursue it until I feel like I've learned everything I can or everything I need to process, and then I will move on to something else. Usually, though, this will result in me coming back to those same topics, and I come back to them over and over again. Those topics that are important to life, they're important to relationships and family. My goal is always to focus on the big things, the important things of life, or at least ones that I perceive. I don't like little conversations about what the weather is like. I want to know, how are you feeling today? What are you struggling with? Right? These type of conversations are the ones that I like to have. So one of the things is we need to understand about who we are. Now, I don't want to make this an exhaustive overview of Myers-Briggs personality test, but there is one more thing I just kind of want people to kind of take away. I would encourage you to go and take a test yourself and go to the different websites. I like this one, 16 personalities, but I want to go over just two aspects of personality. The first one is our processing of information, and they talk about it as energy, and they say it's the second aspect determines how we see the world. Observant individuals are highly practical, pragmatic, down to earth, right? They already have habits on what's happening or already happened. But intuitive individuals are very imaginative, open-minded, curious. We prefer novelty over stability and focus on hidden meanings and future possibilities. This is how we process this information. The second part of this is our aspect that determines how we make decisions and cope with our emotions. We call this our nature. So this would be, for me, it would be this thinking individual. We focus on objectivity and rationality. I prioritize logic over emotions. I tend to hide my feelings and see efficiency as more important than cooperation. That is so true. Whereas feeling individuals are sensitive and emotionally expressive. They are more empathetic, emphatic to tell my proclivities there. But feeling people are more empathetic. And they're less competitive than thinking types. And they focus on social harmony and cooperation. So what you see there is we each will have things that are important to who we are. It really helps us to understand what we bring to the table. When we go to begin our search for truth, for God, for ultimate reality, how are we processing that information? And then how are we dealing with those emotions that develop and how we think through things? However, we do need to realize that no one is all thinking and no feeling. We're not Data from Star Trek The Next Generation, all thinking and no emotions. We're humans, which means we have some emotions. There may be people that have autism that are highly, highly thinking, and we have other people that are highly, highly emotional, but they still have some aspects of both. So we need to understand a little bit about who we are, how we're reacting to our emotions, and how we're dealing with those things. What this means is, even though I might give ideas and thoughts and rational, logical arguments that I think convinces me, it may not convince somebody else. They may have an emotional reaction to it. They may think about it differently. And so that will lead us to different conclusions. We have different experiences. We have different knowledge bases. So what I'm trying to attempt to do is kind of break us down and start back from the beginning of where we need to kind of work through who we are, how we think about things, and how that's going to impact our search. Personality and life experiences matter. So as I go through, I'm going to try to acknowledge both, but I just want people to realize where my proclivities, my default processing is going to lie. So if I wind up frustrating somebody, causing somebody else to get emotional over an argument, or that you just disagree, you think that I am completely wrong, put a comment below. We'll try to address it, try to deal with those type of issues. Yet we have to realize that ultimately truth doesn't care about our feelings. Math, these are natural processes. We just experienced Hurricane Ian, didn't care about how we felt about it. It was coming no matter what we did. So truth is irrespective of our feelings. And so we need to be very diligent when we are searching for truth, when we're searching for ultimate reality, and we're searching for God, that our feelings don't cloud our search, that we don't discount or deny certain information simply because we don't like it. So, as I've said before, I can take my emotions and put them in this little box. I've done a much better job over the last 15, 20 years, thanks to my wife, to be able to pull them out of boxes and really examine them. But for many, many years, I would just kind of put my emotions in this nice little box, and I just wouldn't deal. I wouldn't deal with things from my childhood, from my teenage years. I just wouldn't deal with them. We need to understand that we do need to be able to deal with them, but truth doesn't succumb to emotions and our feelings. However, that being said, people can care about one another. And if God is a being, God could potentially care about human beings. We don't know that. That's what we're looking for, but God could care. If it winds up being that there is no God and that everything is completely materialistic and naturalistic processes, then there's nobody that cares other than just other humans. There is no one who cares about what we're going through and our emotions regarding death, evil, and injustice in this world. After we have examined our own abilities, how we gather information, and how we process information, now we go out into the world to actually collect some information and data. This is where we're going to find little nuggets of information, truth, and gather clues and kind of put things together and pack them together. So there's 3 primary sources where the individual can now gather data about truth and about God. So the first one is just going to be the natural world around us. That's going to be gathered through science and math, the universe, and everything that we kind of experience there. The second option is that we can gather it through other people, what other people have gained or know or have learned. And our third option is going to be other beings. So other beings that are not human. I guess we could kind of lump together humans and other beings, but they may have other types of senses or other types of information or knowledge. And so we're going to kind of explore that a little bit. Which ones would be most important to you? Put a comment below. What are those sources of data? So the first one that we're going to deal with is we're going to deal with science. We're going to deal with the world around us. And we have 5 primary senses that we deal with. We know we have our sight, we have our hearing, being able to listen to things, touch, smell, taste. These are the ways that we interact with our world around us. Certain ones become more of a priority than others. We know that in nature and science, we can test things. We look for reproducibility. Can we do an experiment over and over? Do we get similar results? And so by doing that, we can start to determine that what are the truths that are out there. And we know that we've learned more and more. I mean, the amount of science that we've learned in the last 200 years, last 50 years, it's just mind-boggling. You go to a library, there's just books and reams of data. In medicine, we use databases to try to keep us up to date on what's going on because there's so much data. There's so many. It's hard to keep up with everything. So when we ask, how do we search from God or for God, we look first at ourselves And now we're going out into the world. And after we go out into the world, then we will encounter other humans. We'll encounter other people who have done different experiments and have different information bases. And we talk with them. And we take our own theories and our own reason and we bounce it against other people and see, does our reasoning make sense? Is it logical? And we need to be always recognizing that maybe we aren't seeing something properly. Maybe we're not testing something properly. Maybe we're biased. Maybe our own pride has blinded our eyes, and so that we're not able to determine what this truth might be. But ultimately, what we know is that there are certain things that our senses are going to fail us. There are certain things that we know that we can't see. We can't see X-rays, ultraviolet light. We don't see electrons with our eyes unaided. We don't see these things. We don't have those senses or abilities. Now, we have the ability to make devices that detect these things. Cell phones are pretty much ubiquitous. I'm putting this on a computer. Don't know how half this stuff works. I don't think I really know how 10% of this works. But it does, and we can communicate that way. Because we know that we're limited, because we know that there is information that we're not able to obtain, then we start to go through looking for information from beings that might have more knowledge. We go looking for this being God. We look for aliens. We look for certain beings that might be able to provide us more information and more knowledge about ultimate reality and the truth. What's the difficulty with trying to get information and knowledge from other beings? We don't really understand what their language is. So what about a being who doesn't live in this dimension, or a being that lives in another galaxy? We're unable to communicate with them. So part of us is also dependent upon other beings or other people to provide us that information. So if we're looking for God, I think we need to understand that we're not going to be able to necessarily communicate with God. And if we communicate with some being, how do we know that that being is God? How do we get that verified information? So these are going to be things that we struggle with as we go through this process. But the first thing we need to understand is who we are. And so when we go through the next couple of sections, we're going to talk about knowledge. How do we know what we know? What do we know about information? Is there anything that we know with 100% certain? This is an amazing task. This is a huge game. We have limited rules. We have certain things that we cannot cross, certain boundaries we can't cross. We start with certain resources that we have, and we're going to go out and we're going to collect all these other resources. The task is great. The stakes are life-changing, truly life and death. So we have to ask ourselves, can man ever hope to find God? That's going to be the challenge here. What are we going to do? How are we going to do this? How are we going to know the truth and ultimate reality? My contention is going to be that without God speaking to humans, we're never going to know God. So, why am I searching for God? Searching for truth. Why am I searching for truth? Because I want to know ultimate reality. Why am I personally searching for God? Because I want an answer about death, about what the ultimate reality and truth is about death. How can I search for God? I'm going to use the tools that I have. I'm going to use my senses. I'm going to use reason, knowledge, logic, process it through this brain that doesn't know everything and will be limited to this little space right here. I'm going to reach out to other people. I'm going to look at other philosophers. I'm going to use tests like the Myers-Briggs test to understand more about who we are, who I am. Thank you so much for joining me so far on this journey. I hope you'll continue to tune in. Shalom, God bless, and peace.